Peter, thanks very much. Well, we were hoping that David Steele was about to arrive at his count at, in Selkirk, Tweedale, Ettrick and Lauderdale. It may indeed be his car, though I don't think you can tell very much from a pair of headlights. William Pitt has lost Croydon North West. Yes, William Pitt, who stood there for the Liberals, who refused to stand down and make way for Shirley Williams. As David Steele arrives at his count, you may hear the news that Bill Pitt is out of Croydon.
Very well, as far as
Mrs. Williams and Mr. Rogers arrived. How do you feel about that?
Well, naturally, I'm very sad for both Shirley and Bill. I worked with them very well over the last 2 years, got to know them very well, and it's very sad. But I think what is important is that both Roy Jenkins and David Owen are back, and therefore, whatever the number of seats as we have, there is a strong political movement backed by a massive vote in the country. Over a quarter of the people have voted for us, and we have got the strength there in the House of Commons to build on that.
But in the Commons,
I can't answer six questions. No, wait a minute.
Are you going to get the seats,
Wait a minute, one at a time. Mr. Cole first, right.
Isn't it going to be likely, Mr. Steele, that in the House of Commons it's going to be the Liberal Party and the Gang of Two?
No, it's much too early to say that. I think we're going to do much better than that as the night wears on. Now, wait a minute, Alistair.
Can I just ask you what your reaction is to Bill Pitt losing his seat? That's the first Liberal casualty.
It is the first, and I think it'll be the only Liberal casualty. I'm very sad about it, but like Shirley Williams at Crosby, it's very difficult to hold these seats which are natural Tory territory, which we win at by-elections, and they did very well, but they didn't quite make it.
Are you going to get the seats that you need?
We're not going to get as many seats as we wanted, but we're winning seats, and that's important.
Did you expect the slaughter of the SDP?
It's not a slaughter. I think the SDP have done extremely well. Their votes have held up extremely well throughout the country, and they're going to be back in force.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Okay. Super.
Labour, Eric Ogden, SDP, lost Liverpool West Derby. That's another SDP candidate down. If all the drama seems to centre around the Liberals and the SDP, it's for obvious reasons. The SDP is seeing candidate after candidate at this election who were MPs in Parliament fall by the wayside. But the big story is nevertheless Mrs. Thatcher's landslide victory, though we haven't heard very much from the Tories for a bit, but they've been picking up seats here and there, but we've been watching these other seats go all the time to the SDP. Let's just see what the state of the parties is. We've now nearly reached the halfway mark. We've had 312 seats declared, the Conservatives at 185, Labour at 118, Liberal SDP Alliance at 8, and the others at 1. And we're still getting a lot of results coming in fairly fast, but if we can just take a break for a moment and join Robin Day, who's got a new panel of guests who've been waiting to say something and be very patient, haven't had a word in edgeways yet. Robin.
Well, we've got a new Conservative, not a new Conservative, an old Conservative, but he's just newly arrived, Edward Ducan, who's waiting for his result to be declared tomorrow. And I'm going to ask Alan Beath first, if I may, to say what he thinks about how the Liberals have done. You heard what David Steele had to say, but what do you think?
Right, not much notice has been given to the fact so far that we've held every seat that's been declared up to now except Bill Pitt's seat in Croydon. We've made 2 significant gains, and I expect that to be the pattern of the night, some quite significant gains, which will give us some representation, although inadequate, for getting a quarter of the votes in the country, at least.
But if there's about 20 Liberal seats in the next Parliament and a couple of Social Democrats, wouldn't it make more sense for the Social Democrats to join the Liberal Party?
It's obvious that we work very closely together in that situation, just as we have in the previous Parliament where the balance was the other way. They had significantly more seats than we had. But we'd expect to work extremely closely in those circumstances.
Yes, I know you would, but wouldn't it make more sense to just join the Liberal Party? Why have 2 parties?
They have a big party in the country which supports them and which is behind them in what they do.
Edward Ducan, do you see the case for electoral reform being proven by these results?
No, I see no case for electoral change. I wouldn't call it reform. It's change thereafter. People who don't do terribly well and then blame the umpire...
Excuse me just a moment. I have to go away from you to...
Returning officer for that constituency hereby give notice The total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Ernest Hector Andrews,
National Front.
343. Anthony Neil Wedgwood Benn,
Labour.
18,055. Gundula Dory, 311. Jonathan Said,
Conservative.
19,800. Jonathan Said, 19,844. Peter Edward Tyra,
Liberal.
10,404. And I hereby declare that Jonathan Said has been elected to serve as member for the said constituency. I also declare that the number of ballot papers rejected and not counted by me at this election totalled 121.
And so Tony Benn, after 33 years, is of the House of Commons. And here's the victor, Jonathan Said.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to make a political speech, but I would like to start by thanking the other candidates. I determined at the beginning of this campaign to fight cleanly and to fight fairly. And I'm grateful to all the other candidates for doing exactly the same. But I would like to congratulate Mr. Benn in particular, because I think it took great courage for him to come and fight in this constituency and to try and represent Bristol as he has done for over 30 years. He could have easily run to a much safer seat, which the left wing now control. But he didn't do so, and I think that showed great courage. I would like to also thank all those people who've helped me so magnificently during this campaign. They've done a superb job, but I'm sure they will permit me to mention just a few names. The first one is my wife, who's given me help and encouragement and support. The second one is Gwen Barrow, OBE, the constituency chairman, who has done such a magnificent job as the campaign director. The third is John Vowles, my agent, who's done a marvellous job as well. And the fourth one is Sir Alexander Muir Mackenzie, a personal friend who's helped me for 4 solid weeks. And I'm grateful to all of them. But I would like to say this. I'm deeply grateful to the electors of Bristol who have given me such fine support, and I will do all I can to support them as their MP for as long as they want me to be. We together will build a Bristol and Britain proud of its past and looking...
Well, we'll go back down there as soon as Tony Benn starts speaking. That's Jonathan Said, who's beaten Tony Benn, man who was very nearly made Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, who was behind all the moves that led to the reselection of MPs, to the changes in the constituency and all the rest of it. Here he is now making his acceptance speech, his rejection speech.
First of all, I thank the Chartists and the suffragettes who gave every working man and woman a vote in this country. And every election is a tribute to their struggle. Secondly, I would like to thank the people of Bristol who over a third of a century have returned me to Parliament to say how glad I am I stayed, since nothing but the defeat and decision of the people of Bristol would ever have induced me to leave this city. And third, I would like to say thank you to the Labour voters, not only in this constituency, but all over the country, who have stood firm with a very good programme in an election when a great deal has been thrown at them and they have been diverted from their faith in our policy. Now, I hope that I hope that no Labour voters up and down the country will be discouraged by this result. We have 3 jobs to do, whether we are in Parliament or out of Parliament. First, to protect the people for whom the Labour movement was first established. And that task of protecting them will be even more necessary if we have another 5 years of a Conservative government. Secondly, we have to build the Labour movement again, and that we shall do in order to protect people and in order to begin the campaign for the next general election. If I may just say one personal word at the end. I do not believe that politics is about personalities, and I want to make absolutely clear to those in this constituency and elsewhere that what has happened today will make absolutely no difference to my own commitment to the Labour movement, which can be discharged as well outside Parliament as inside Parliament. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, Tony Benn, who's been standing as MP for Bristol for 30 years or so, defeated in this election, saying that nothing but defeat would have induced me to leave Bristol, suggesting perhaps that he will now look for another seat elsewhere. Though, as you heard, he said that you didn't need a seat in Parliament to look after the people that the Labour Party was meant to look after. But a pretty shattering blow to the left of the Labour Party, that the man who was part architect of all the plans that went into this manifesto, who fought time and again for them, defeated after being moved to that seat because his old seat went, and not able to get the seat. Michael Cox, the Labour Chief Whip, got Bristol South, which is the safer of the Labour seats in Bristol. He was moved to that one, which is not quite so safe. Obviously had a very difficult campaign. Conservative majority, 1,789. Now, we've had 330. We're just past the halfway mark on seats, with a Conservative gain there. Let's just see, Peter, how the state of the parties looks.
And some very exciting news for the Liberals there too, with them gaining Leeds West. Michael Meadowcroft rewarded there for a lot of hard work fighting Labour in Leeds West. There's the national summary, 196 Conservative seats. Look at them popping up on the map there. There go the Labour Party, 125, they're down 10. And there are the orange dots for the Liberal SDP alliance, and Leeds West has come up as a gain there too. They are down 10 on balance though. And here are the gains on their own, the Tory gains that are going to bring the Tories this landslide majority. Labour have given away 18 seats to the Tories. The Liberal SDP alliance have had to, on balance, give up 9 seats. But just look for a moment at the Liberal gains, the Liberal SDP gains from the Conservatives. There they are. Liverpool, Mossley Hill, Montgomery and Yeovil have gone to the Liberal SDP alliance from the Conservatives. And the seat that we've just heard, Leeds West, has been gained from Labour by the Liberals.
And Paul Boateng, who worked the GLC, chief of the police committee there, left-winger, black candidate, fails to take Hertfordshire West. The Conservatives gain Hertfordshire West. At that point, as it's one of his colleagues, we might go and talk to Ken Livingstone, who's with Vincent Hanna.
Mr. Livingstone, you heard Mr. Benn's speech. He talked about extra-parliamentary activity earlier tonight. You talked about the struggle moving outside Parliament. What on earth do you mean?
Well, clearly the Labour Party will not have the votes to defeat the Tories in Parliament. The defence of Labour councils that have refused to comply with the government's cuts, the defence of the trade unions, must therefore be mounted outside Parliament. Undoubtedly there'll be a lot of support from within the Parliamentary Labour Party, but the only way we can defeat this government now is outside.
What do you mean defeat the government?
Well, the same sort of thing that we did in London.
What do you mean defeat the government in what sense?
Mobilise public opinion against them so that you can lead them into a position where they have to retreat. I don't think anyone a year ago would have assumed we could, by fighting, get fares back down in London. That's a small indication of, I think, the way the left will have to organise outside Parliament. Every factory closure will have to be resisted. Every cut imposed by this government will have to be resisted. And I'm certain we'll have support from Labour MPs. But the fight and the struggle to achieve the victory and replace this government has to be mounted outside.
No, but isn't it just... Couldn't you put this another way? You had a left-wing programme which you put fair and square before the people. The people have rejected it. Isn't it clear, therefore, that your policies were wrong?
No, I think the compromise programme, and it was not a wholly left-wing programme.
I don't think the people saw it as a compromise.
Well, that's because of what they were told by the press. The Labour left have been arguing that we should control capital, control the wealth in the City of London. And I think our programme, as it was put forward by Peter Shaw, emphasised far too much borrowing, which I don't think anybody sees as the way out of the present economic crisis.
So you would like to have seen a more left-wing, uncompromised programme?
I think we would have done much better with that much firmer programme. We failed to convince people in this country we could solve the economic crisis. Therefore, we have to look at how we deal with this problem.
Denis Healy's comment about your remark was claptrap.
Well, we always have colourful comments from Denis Healy.
Thank you very much indeed, Ken Livingstone. Back to you, David.
Well, thank you, Vincent. Let's just go over to Sir Robin again for a moment.
Well, now, Mr. Ducan, I was interrupting you. What do you have to say about this state of affairs?
I think the Conservative Party has won a splendid victory, and I'm very pleased, particularly for the Prime Minister.
Has it been won because of the greatness of the Prime Minister and her policies, or because of the shambles of the Labour Party?
The substantial victory that obviously the Conservative Party is going to have began because it had adopted very left-wing policies which the country didn't like.
Isn't it evident that the intervention of the SDP Liberal Alliance in the way that it has done has let in the Tories in a number of seats? I noticed Mr. Varley writing them down where the Tories would never have had a chance
Yes,
before.
that's happened, but it came second. What happened first was that it was demonstrated very clearly in the country about 10 days ago that the Labour Party was running very much out of steam, and the country just didn't want a left-wing dominated Labour Party.
But they're not running all that out of steam, are they, Mr. Varley? Because they have appeared, so far, it looks as if they've come second and not third, as seemed some of the polls were suggesting.
Yes. It's been a very bad defeat for the Labour Party, and there's no good trying to hide that. Very bad defeat. But anybody who writes the Labour Party off, of course, are out of their mind, because we survived similar defeats in the past. 1931, 1935, 1959, for example. I remember the Conservative Party under Harold Macmillan getting what was regarded at that time as a landslide, a 100 majority or whatever it was. And, of course, 5 years later, Labour won. Labour won the 1964 election, and Labour can come back again. What I read about all this result, of course, is that the Liberals have done quite well, but the SDP have been defeated. And the SDP have led in Conservatives at Slough, at Darlington, Stockport, Hayes and Harlington, Cardiff West, Erith and Crayford and Dewsbury. That's what they've done. They've, as it were, helped to enhance the Conservative victory.
But what will you... Yes, Alan Beef.
If you support the electoral system as it stands, you can't then complain that one of its effects is to produce in constituencies of various kinds results other than those the voters actually wanted.
No, I'm not complaining about that, Alan. I'm complaining that the Liberals, really, have known what they were on with right from the beginning here, and they've gobbled up the SDP for breakfast. What we'll have, you'll probably have a larger Liberal Party, but not all that much larger in the House of Commons, and two representatives of the SDP. That's
Mr. Varley, can I ask if you agree with Edward Ducan in total opposition to electoral reform or electoral change, as he correctly describes it?
I don't think the case has been made out for electoral reform.
What would make out the case, then, if this result doesn't?
Well, I want to see the total results. I want to see how Mrs Thatcher's new government is going to perform in Parliament, for example. If it's going to be a hard, strident, if you like, arrogant, bellicose government, I think perhaps the case is made out.
Excuse me, we go to Mr Foot's result in... Oh.
And here at Blaenau Gwent, Mr Foot has come into the hall, but I don't think we're quite ready for the result yet. There's still a fair bit of counting going on, although it is reaching the final stages. Mr Foot himself doesn't appear to be too depressed by the news that's coming in around the country. He's been sitting outside following it on one of the television sets, in fact one of the two television sets provided by the Leisure Centre here in Ebbw Vale, which is the seat which is now called Blaenau Gwent. A very famous seat, one that Aneurin Bevan held from the 30s right through till his death in 1960. And then Mr Foot, who is of course the great acolyte of Aneurin Bevan, held it then in a by-election. A by-election which he saw then and was portrayed then as a great referendum on unilateral disarmament. And to his satisfaction, he won that, which he saw as part of his battle with the then leader of the Labour Party, Hugh Gaitskell. But those are battles of the past. This is a different battle tonight. And unilateralism is still something Mr Foot makes no secret of espousing, although in this election it's unemployment that he has said has come at the top of his priorities. The turnout is about 77%. That's rather better than it was the last time. We expect the result not too long in the distant future. We'll be back for it then. Now back to the studio in London. David.
Well, Michael Foot waiting for his result, and while we wait for that also, let's just have a look at one or two more results that have come in, because there's some very interesting things going on out there. Let's just see this one, for instance, Richard Wainwright. Remember I said at the beginning it would be described as a Liberal gain, though he's actually sat for this constituency of Colne Valley ever since 1966. He lost it between 70 and 74. Colne Valley goes to the Liberals. Labour were after it. Tories thought they might get it. Tories go second, and Labour right down in third place. Very bad result for them. Interesting one in Glasgow Cathcart, taken by Labour. This was the one that Teddy Taylor was thrown out of at the last election for the Tories. The Tory vote is now right down once again in Glasgow Cathcart. It falls a further 15%, and the vote goes to the SDP, who, interestingly, are doing best in Scotland outside the southwest, getting 17% increase in their vote. Have a look at another Scottish seat, for instance, Renfrew West and Inverclyde, where Conservative, SDP and Labour are almost even, a third each. And the SDP vote, that's Dixon Mabon, Dr. Dixon Mabon, who defected to the SDP, that vote up 11% on the Liberal vote at the last time. Dennis Skinner, safely in his Bolsover seat, and his vote is down again, 7% in favour of the SDP, but no risk to him there. So the SDP are also quite interesting. The SDP actually doing better than the Liberals in improving on performance. They're doing it, where there was a Liberal before, they're actually doing a little bit better than the Liberals are in increasing the share of the vote. Remember Simon Hughes, of course, he was the man who took Bermondsey from Peter Tatchell, and he did it only a few months ago in that by-election of Bermondsey. It can help a bit if you've had all the publicity of winning a by-election, you have a general election afterwards. The same thing happened to David Alton at the last general election. He had been, only a matter of a week or a couple of weeks, I think it was, in the House of Commons. And his name had been in the papers, he'd been interviewed and all the rest of it, so everybody knew him. And the same thing seems to have happened to Simon Hughes down there. Well, now we're waiting for Blaenau Gwent result, and while we are, Peter has some more things out of the amazing machine.
Well, David, here is something to think about. The popular vote so far, after 383 results, shows this picture. 7,800,000 Conservative votes. There they are. Labour on 5,393,000 votes. And the Liberal SDP alliance, not so very far behind, 700,000 odd votes behind on 4.5 million votes, and the others on 274,000. Now, remember that popular vote and look at the forecast. There it is, the Conservatives forecast on 394, Labour on 217, but the Liberals with the Liberal SDP alliance with 25% of the vote forecast to win 4%, only 18 of the seats. Now, just supposing this were a proportional representation election, then it would look like this. If this were a different electoral system here, then you would have the Tories on 280, the Labour Party on 193, and the Liberal SDP alliance, just like they are in that popular vote, not so very far behind Labour, and the others on 11. Look at the differences on the last Parliament, and interestingly enough, when you then put in the winning post, you find the 326, the Conservatives aren't there. And the Labour Party, of course, aren't there either, nor the Liberal SDP alliance. But that would present a possibility for coalition between the Conservatives and Labour, between the Conservatives and the Liberal SDP alliance, and even between Labour and the Liberal SDP alliance. So just look at the difference that that different kind of electoral system would bring.
Shirley Summerskill defeated in Halifax. Remember her, the daughter of Edith Summerskill, who was against boxing. Richmond, Surrey, Chelmsford, both having recounts. Alex Lyon for Labour loses York. It's now 2 o'clock, just coming up to 2 minutes, 1 minute past 2 o'clock. And with those results, 244, 147, 11-1. We'll be back in a moment with more results.
And here in the southeast, we've now had 49 results in, and we're awaiting 22. And the big one is this one, which is the, we have the picture for the southeast here. After 49 results, Conservatives have 48, they're up 6, Labour 1, down 6, and Liberal SDP still waiting. The big result and the shock one is Slough, where we see Joan Lester, the famous unilateralist, member of the of Labour's executive for some 16 years, has been ousted there by John Watts. A short while ago, we asked Joan Lester what sort of trouble she thought Labour was in now in the light of this result at Slough.
Well, I haven't heard all of the results, so I don't know, but clearly we're not doing very well at the moment, and that's very sad, and I'm very, very sorry. But just as I said a little earlier, in 38 years the Tories have only ever held this seat for 18 months, and I think you'll find in many other constituencies this is a temporary lapse, and it's not the end of the Labour Party, and we'll be back.
You warned that... So, Joan Lester out of Parliament there after 16 years, now back to David.
Our reporter Peter Taylor has just managed to get a word with James Callaghan, who won his seat in Cardiff and who played a prominent part in this campaign, you remember, both saying that there might have to be an incomes policy if Labour came back, also saying that he didn't think that the policy on unilateral disarmament made much sense, rather siding with Dennis Healey on that. Anyway, he won his seat, and in a moment we'll be hearing an interview with him, which Peter Taylor did down at his seat in Cardiff. Except that I think we seem to have lost it for the moment. Anyway, on one of these screens, he will magically appear.
Mr. Callaghan, congratulations, first of all, on becoming Father of the House.
Well, that's something you don't achieve by merit, just by longevity.
It was a close fight, though.
Very close.
2,000 majority?
Yes, I forecast that because the boundary commissioners took a very big bite out of us, but we still managed to survive.
Are you surprised at Labour's collapse nationally?
Not particularly. I don't know they've collapsed yet, have they? I haven't heard any recent results.
Victory is not in sight?
No, victory is not in sight. I'm not surprised about that.
Why not?
For various reasons that no doubt we shall all be discussing over the next few weeks.
Didn't you help exocet Labour's chances by the speech that you made on defence?
No, Labour's defence policy was not a very acceptable policy, nor particularly credible in the way it was put forward, I'm afraid.
Given the result of the election, would not silence have been better?
My views on this were made known last November, and my constituents were asking me, and I don't think that that policy was a policy that was acceptable to the country.
Do you regret having made that speech?
Certainly not. We shall have to come back to this issue.
Aren't the left going to blame you for losing the election?
Possibly. But if they do, they'll be hiding their heads in the sand.
Do you think that Labour would have fared differently with a different manifesto, in particular as far as defence was concerned?
I'm not saying in relation to what, but certainly a different manifesto would have helped.
Who would you support as the next leader of the Labour Party?
There is no vacancy.
Perhaps there may be fairly soon.
In that case, I'll take that decision when it arises.
Would you, for example, support Mr Hattersley as leader with Mr Kinnock as his deputy?
When Mr Foot takes his decision, then we shall all know where we stand.
Is that the combination that you would support, you would favour?
I have no more to say about that, because Mr Foot is the leader of the party.
In future, do you think the Labour Party should tailor its manifesto to the electorate rather than the party itself?
Oh, no. The Labour Party always has the role of leading the country and leading people, and our policies on a great many of these issues, especially economic policies, are correct. And I shall use my voice in Parliament in order to undo the damage that Mrs Thatcher is doing at the present time. No, you mustn't tailor your policies merely to that, but you must get a combination in which the public recognises your policies as being relevant to their needs.
Well, clearly the public has not recognised that at this election.
That is so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Callaghan. Mr Callaghan, can I ask...
Peter Shaw, you saw, safely back. They thought there might be some difficulty there for Peter Shaw in the East End of London, but Shadow Chancellor for Labour is back safely. Another SNP man, Gordon Wilson in Dundee East, safely back. And then two results, one a Labour loss. The bearded Philip Whitehead, broadcasting spokesman. Well, we've lost it just briefly. We've got that result, and that's Daffyd Wigley of the Welsh Nationalists holding it. Philip Whitehead, bad result for him in Derby North. Moderate member, right wing of the Labour Party, his vote down 11% in this Midland seat of Derby North. And then Southwark and Bermondsey, Simon Hughes, his majority cut from the by-election from 9,000 to 5,000, but he's safely in there. Labour goes back to second place, having pushed right down when Peter Tatchell held it. The Conservative Robert Hughes in third place, not quite losing his deposit, just saving it. Now, let's join Robin Day.
Well, now, I want to ask Edward Buchan, the very senior Conservative figure in Parliament, whose result will be known tomorrow, what he thought about the diagram put up by Peter Snow and proportional representation if these figures had been under a proportional representation system.
I thought it exactly proved the case, Robin, against proportional representation, because it showed at once how the first effect of any sort of PR system, and there's great argument as to what system to choose, results in the fragmentation of parties.
You would have a hung parliament on these figures?
Well, you would have had a Labour government on those figures, undoubtedly, with the SDP joining them, because they're only a socialist party, Mark II. That's why they're not winning seats.
There you are, Alan Beith. What do you say to that?
Edward Buchanan is reducing the level of the argument. It's quite clear the country hasn't voted by any kind of landslide for any particular government. At the present showing, only about 43% of the people have voted for Mrs Thatcher. The majority will have voted against her. And it's quite clear there isn't a landslide majority for a particular set of policies at all.
I was interested to see that the Tory percentage for about 43% is less than 51, less than in 55, less than in 59, and less than in 1970.
This landslide is merely a product of the electoral system. There is not a majority for what the Prime Minister wants to do, and she shouldn't be allowed to pretend that there is.
But you can. We've only seen about half the results anyway. But there's another point which requires to be made, and that is, look at it however you like. This election is a watershed in British politics. It's going to change British politics substantially, and I think that's a very good thing.
Say why? Because I think the reason will be a different reason from Alan Beith.
Because, firstly, the British electorate have decided, in their sensible way, they want to see the extremists out of British public life and out of British politics. That's the first reason. Second reason is they want the creation of a new party of the left. Now, however that comes about, that's what they want, and they've expressed themselves very clearly indeed. I feel rather sorry for the Liberals, because I think if the Liberals hadn't made what I regarded as an idiotic marriage with the SDP, I think they would have done much better on their own.
Now, listening to us up in Manchester is Gerald Kaufman. Mr. Kaufman, you got in all right, didn't you?
That's right, yes.
And what do you say to what we've been saying now? Because we've had did you hear the little discussion about proportional representation? What do you have to say then?
Well, I suppose the Liberals, from their point of view, have got an argument. We in the Labour Party are ready to take our chance with the electoral system. It's perfectly true that this isn't a vote of confidence for Mrs Thatcher, far from it. But the way the dice have fallen means that she's going to get a big majority in Parliament.
But should we have dice? Because dice suggests a bit of a gamble and a bit of a lottery. Why can't we have what Mr Beith would regard as a fair system?
Every election is a lottery whichever way it goes. And let's say that we'd had proportional representation this time. What it would have meant would have been the third largest party dictating to the two larger parties who should be the government. But the electorate certainly hasn't voted for the third largest party to form the government.
But Mr Buchan says that if we'd had proportional representation on this state of opinion in the country, we'd have a Labour government tomorrow, with you as possibly as Chancellor of the Exchequer or something like that, Gerald.
An extremely attractive proposition, of course, Robin.
Does that make you reconsider your opinion?
No, it doesn't. My principles override my ambition.
That's a wonderful statement to have. Alan, what do you say to that?
Well, I simply think the electoral system is defrauding the British people of what they said. They said that they didn't want the Labour Party as an alternative government, although something less than a third of the people still support the Labour Party. A quarter of the people wanted us, and less than half wanted the Conservatives.
Thank you. We'll come back to you again. If you could stay with us for a moment, Gerald Kaufman. Thank you. David?
We're going straight down to Chelmsford for the result of Norman St John Stevens. Vote down there,
Chelmsford constituency.
There is a
I, being the returning officer for the constituency above mentioned, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Mole, Stuart Gordon, 29,446. Playford, Clive Ernest,
Labour,
3,208. St John Stevens, Norman Anthony Francis,
Conservative,
29,824. Wait, Philip David Peel, 127. And that Norman Anthony Francis St John Stevens has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
Norman St John Stevens holds his seat with a majority of 378.
Hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Atkinson Gareth Martin, 6,488. Liberal. Foot Michael McIntosh, Labour, 30,113. Morgan Stephen, 1,624. Morgan Talmai Philip, 4,816. And that the undermentioned person has been duly elected to serve as a member for the said constituency, Michael McIntosh Foot.
Mr. Returning Officer, may I first of all thank you and all your staff, the scrutineers, and all those who have worked for you during this campaign for the way in which the work has been done. I'm sure that all the candidates agree that it has been done with great skill and fairness, and we would like to congratulate you and thank all your staff for the work that they have done. We would also like to include in our thanks special thanks to the police for the way in which they have also assisted in the fair way in which our contest has been conducted. And I would like to thank all my opponents in this constituency. I know it is not an easy matter to oppose the Labour Party candidate in this constituency, and I would like to offer my thanks to them for the way in which they've conducted this campaign. Naturally, we in the Labour Party, who regard this justly as one of the great socialist strongholds in the country, one of the great strongholds of the Labour Party, the two constituencies that have been joined together are two strongholds that have been joined in this boundary change. Naturally, we rejoice in the victory we have secured here, but that victory is overcast by some of the events that have happened elsewhere in the country. There will be other opportunities to comment upon those events, but I just say three or four things very briefly. First of all, as anyone can see from the campaign which we have conducted up and down the country, and which I believe the Labour Party has conducted magnificently, I've seen it in 70 or 80 of the marginal constituencies of this country where the Labour Party has fought with all its strength and all its determination to win, and yet we have not succeeded in doing so. Well, we do believe it is a tragedy for our country that there should have been such a result. We believe the consequences of our country, both at home and abroad, are bound to be serious, because the case which we presented against the government was a case which we believed was absolutely based on a just recognition of the situation that we faced and our country faced. So we naturally deplore those results. Then there are, for us in the Labour Party, many individual defeats, individual people who've been defeated, very fine members of the last House of Commons whom we will look to see back in that House of Commons at a fairly early date. I would also say that there were statements previously made that some of the other parties were going to break the mold of British politics. There has been no breaking of the mold in the sense that they said. All that has happened is that some of those who intervened in the way they did have handed seats to the Conservative Party and thereby assisted in giving a victory to the government which I believe the country does not want to see running our affairs over these coming years. For the Labour Party as a whole, up and down the country, I agree with those who say that the fight to win the next election starts immediately. We will renew all our strength, we will renew our determination to win, and the Labour movement, the Labour Party of this country, will form the government after the next election.
Michael Foot, their leader of the Labour Party, accepting that his party has been defeated at this election and talking about the intervention of the SDP, who helped to make that possible, saying they hadn't done as well in those marginals as indeed these figures show that they have not. Now let's just have a look at one or two of the results that have come through. This is Mr. Foot's own result in Blaenau Gwent, and his majority is up there in that very safe Labour seat. And then we've got the result from Chelmsford, Norman St John Stevens, who held on just by a whisker in Chelmsford. His majority only 378. There were one or two other changes. The Conservatives took a very safe Labour seat in Nottingham North from a moderate Labour MP. Conservatives took that seat. Hilary Benn, you may have noticed, Tony Benn's son, didn't manage to take Ealing North, which they'd hoped they'd take. And there's a recount in Blaby. I don't think it can be a recount for who's won Blaby, because it's held by Nigel Lawson, Financial Secretary of the Treasury, generally thought to be a safe Conservative seat. So it's probably a recount, somebody trying to save their £150 deposit. If not, it's a pretty sensational result. Energy Secretary is actually not Financial Secretary of the Treasury, as he was before. Energy Secretary. But anyway, I have no doubt that he's safely back. We shall see. So, Peter, what do you have for us at this stage?
Well, David, 36 Conservative gains so far, but an interesting divergence across the country by region. Here is the picture of the swing to the Conservatives, a national swing of 4%. That's the movement of votes from Labour to Conservative, but in Scotland only a 1% movement. In the north, a little bit more, 3%. Going down the country, Wales 4%, not enough to take Jim Callaghan's seat for the Conservatives. In the Midlands, 4%, a lot of Labour marginals falling to the Tories in the Midlands. And in the south, 5%. So very much that two nations picture of the country there, with the north staying rather more with Labour than the south, but the whole country moving to the Conservatives. Now there's this key picture of the battleground again, those most vulnerable Labour seats, seated number 1, Oxford East, down there, all going to the Tories, right the way down. Alex Lyon falling in York at the bottom there. There they go. 36 Conservative gains altogether. Hilary Benn going down in Ealing North. Colne Valley, Richard Wainwright coming through there and taking very much a three-way marginal from the Conservatives and from Labour there. Blackburn Labour holding on to. Labour beginning to hold on now to some of those safer marginal seats, West Bromwich East and Burnley. Notice how there's a bit of a north-south divide here, with Labour holding on to seats on the whole in the north, losing the odd seat in the south. There's Bristol East going down. Tony Benn's seat, number 45, has gone to the Conservatives. Labour holding on here, one or two going. Conservatives gaining Bridgend in South Wales, that new seat, the southern part of Ogmore, a new seat in South Wales. Cannock, that extraordinary win by the Conservatives in the Midlands there, with the safest of Labour's marginals. And here is that target. Here is the target area, the 60 vulnerable Labour seats the Conservatives are firing at. Watch how the results have hit the target. There they go. 24 hits by the Conservatives in those crucial marginal seats. Quite a lot of hits on the outer rings there, but some hits in the middle. We're looking for about 45, 50 gains for the Conservatives by the end of the night.
And our prediction of a majority of the Conservatives still standing exactly as it did at 10 o'clock at 146. Conservative gain in Newport West. On that note, Tony King has just joined us again. Now, you've been away for an hour and a half or so. We've now got nearly 500 results in. What do you make of what's going on in the country?
Well, we keep talking about a landslide, and of course it's a landslide in terms of seats, but in terms of popular votes, this isn't all that impressive, a Conservative performance. My guess is that by tomorrow afternoon, when all this is over, the Conservatives will have almost exactly the same share of the popular vote as they had in 1979. And the fact that they're doing so much better in terms of seats is almost entirely a consequence of the fact that the Labour Party has been in such bad shape, and that the electoral system, as people over here have kept saying to Sir Robin Day, has been hurting the alliance and helping the Conservatives.
I mean, what would Mrs Thatcher say of 43% of her vote actually going down? Can't call that support for government policy or a mandate or anything like that.
Well, she will call it a mandate, and in terms of seats in the House of Commons, it is a mandate. But as Sir Robin was saying earlier on, in terms of the 50s, this is not a very impressive result.
Well, at 21 minutes past 2, these are the figures we've got at the moment. Conservatives 300, Labour on 177, Liberal SDP Alliance on 11, others 4. Remember, the Conservatives have to get to 326.
Well, here in the southeast, there seems to be a tidal wave of support sweeping the Tories into power. This is the latest state of play in the southeast, with 61 results in and 10 to go. We can see that the Tories have made 6 gains in Hertfordshire West, Stevenage, Oxford East and Basildon. And they've also gone on to gain Harlow and Slough. Let's take a look at Oxford East, which was Labour's most marginal seat, and you can see there that Stephen Norris has won the seat for them, and he is a Volkswagen Audi car dealer in the heart of Cowley, which of course is BL country, which is rather odd. Moving on to Basildon, another Conservative gain, although they already had a Tory candidate because of the boundary changes. That in fact has changed hands, and that's another Conservative gain. Moving on, we have in London, let's take a look at the London situation now. After 66 results with 18 to come, we can see that the Conservatives have 46 seats, that's up 5, Labour 19, and the Alliance 1, and they've lost 5. A look in detail now at Ealing North, which was the barometer of really the way that the rest of London was going to vote. And in fact, Hilary Benn, Tony Benn's son there, has lost. As we can see, Harry Greenway, a man with a flair for publicity, has taken that. He raises money for charity by parachuting and riding horses across Exmoor. Once created a show-jumping team at a comprehensive in King's Cross and got it to beat Eton. So he's a man not to be taken lightly. Moving on to Croydon North West, we see that Bill Pitt, the Liberal spokesman on Home Affairs, who had that famous by-election victory in 1981, has come unstuck there. Humphrey Mallins, a solicitor, has won for the Tories. In Erith and Crayford, James Wellbeloved has gone down. He ended up in second place there. I don't know if we can see that result for Erith and Crayford. A Conservative gain there. Hayes and Harlington, which is more bad news for the SDP. Neville Sanderson, who'd been the member there since 1971, has gone down to Terry Dix, the Conservative, who's a member of Hillingdon Borough Council since 1974. There's the result. We can see a majority for the Conservatives of 4,234. Now, it's been a very bad night for Labour, of course, and GLC leader Ken Livingstone, giving his reaction to some earlier results, said that the struggle between the government and the Labour movement will now move outside Parliament. The limelight will pass from Parliament. Vincent Hanna asked him what he meant by extra-parliamentary activity, and here's what he said.
Well, clearly, the Labour Party will not have the votes to defeat the Tories in Parliament. The defence of Labour councils that have refused to comply with the government's cuts, the defence of the trade unions, must therefore be mounted outside Parliament. Undoubtedly, there'll be a lot of support from within the Parliamentary Labour Party, but the only way we can defeat this government now is outside.
What do you mean defeat
Parliament.
The government?
Well, the same sort of thing that we did in London.
What do you mean defeat the government in what sense?
Mobilise public opinion against them so that you can lead them into a position where they have to retreat.
Well, we'll be going to see Michael Foot in a moment, who's speaking down in Wales, when the rest of the country joins those of us in London who've just been getting the London results. And once they do, we'll do that. But an interesting position here, which we'll be discussing in a moment for the Labour Party. In the meantime, we go down now to Wales for Michael Foot.
Leader of the Labour Party, a personal responsibility for the defeat you now concede Labour has suffered?
Well, of course I've got to accept my responsibilities in the matter, and we will discuss the whole of the election, and I agree with those who've said that the fight to win the next election starts immediately, and I will participate in those discussions, and of course I accept to the full my responsibilities in this election.
Do you think it was because of the left-wing manifesto or the left-wing leader?
No, I don't think it was due to either of those propositions, if those propositions are the case. I think it's due to a longer combination of factors, but we've obviously got to look at them, because I think it's a tragedy for the nation that a government like this should have been returned. I think it's a tragedy at home. I think it's a tragedy for the unemployed, and for all the reasons that we've stated up and down the country. I think the Labour Party up and down the country has fought magnificently in this election. I've seen it. I've seen how we've fought in so many of the marginal constituencies. We've won several fine victories, but we've also had some very bitter personal defeats, and I'm not seeking to disguise that they are there. Of course they are, and everyone who knows the caliber of the members defeated, I will accept what I say.
Would you feel that this is a difficult election, that you'd steered the party through it? It was an election which perhaps you had to lose, but you've limited the damage, and now might be the time to step down and let somebody else take it.
Well, I'm not making any prophecies about the future leadership. I've been flat out fighting this election to win, along with many people in the party who've given absolute loyalty to me in the fight. I'm not making any criticisms of what they're doing, or what has happened. What I think I've got to do, and what others have got to do, is to sit down now and see how best we go ahead to rebuild the party, and I'm sure there will be a tremendous surge of determination to do it up and down the country, and I will play my full part in that, and I hope to be there in some capacity when we have that next election in order to get a Labour government. And I think what we've said in this election, I believe, will be proved to be true over these coming years and will help us to win the next election.
But you'll be nearly 75 at that next election.
Yes.
Surely you accept that you won't lead the Labour
Well,
Party into
I
it.
certainly accept that there have got to be discussions about it, and that's a matter for the Labour Party to decide how they go about it. But I'm sure
When will that happen?
I'm sure there will be over these coming period. I'm not setting any term on it, but I'm sure there will be discussions amongst those who fought this election together as we have. There will be discussions about how best we can all together set about the task of rebuilding our party. And I think one thing we must have learned over these past 5 years is that the time perhaps of greatest importance in winning us the next election is soon after a defeat in this one. So we've got to learn from this defeat, and I believe that's what the Labour movement will do, because of course the other thing that is proved in this election is it is the Labour Party which is the only alternative to reactionary conservatism, and I believe more and more people can see that. Indeed, the figures prove that.
But hasn't the swing to the alliance all over the country proven that, in fact, the people of this country reject, or a high proportion of them reject left-wing policies?
No, I don't think, if you look at the figures in the individual constituencies, I happen to believe it's the individual fights in individual constituencies where people put their case and have the best chance of hearing it. That's where our democracy is founded, and therefore I don't think lumping together figures all over the country have anything like the significance of what happens in the individual seats.
Is this the time for reconciliation with the SDP? Because they seem to have suffered badly in this election.
There's no possibility of any reconciliation between the Labour Party and the SDP, because the SDP is just a bunch of opportunists, some of whose opportunism has paid, some of whom it hasn't paid off, but all they have done is to injure the possibility of throwing out this Tory government. And so far from any reconciliation with them, I think that they won't play any big part in the future. The Liberal Party, I've always said it, is nothing original and new in my view. The Liberal Party is a different proposition from the SDP, which doesn't have any philosophy, it doesn't have any basis in our politics, and I think this election is helping to prove that too.
You said there'd have to be discussions within the party about the leadership. How would that take place? Surely this is a decision for you to take yourself.
No, it's a decision for us to discuss, and I discuss these matters along with everything else about the way we proceed, and that's the right way to go about it. But I'm sure there will be, as I think anybody who's seen even the statements that have already been made, there will be an overwhelming desire by those who have fought this election together in the Labour Party to use the lessons we can draw from it to prepare for what we're going to do to win the next election. And I believe that all of us can join together in doing it. Part which each of us will play has still to be determined.
Well, Michael Foot there. Our interviewer was Brian Hanrahan. And what a strange election this is turning out to be. We've had 511 seats now declared. We're just coming up to the 326 for the Conservatives that will give them the overall majority in the 650-seat Parliament. We know they're going to go on to a fair old landslide in terms of seats, something like 146 seats. And yet, the number of people in the country who are supporting Mrs. Thatcher is not any great increase on the last election. It's probably going to end up just a little bit below the number who supported her in 1979. So there's by no means been a great vindication of Mrs. Thatcher's policies. One wonders what is going to be said at the first meeting of the Cabinet, what she's going to say about this victory. Parliamentarily, it's fine, but in terms of her own policies, of whether it's the backing of the country for them, is it that, or is it actually that the Labour Party in decline at this election at any rate, with its policies all in disarray, not fighting a very convincing campaign, has given way, allowed the SDP, as Mr. Foote was just saying, to make some of the running and just to destroy their side, if you like, of the opposition benches. There are going to be an awful lot of Tories in that place. They're going to have to sit right down one side and right round and back the other in a kind of U-turn, though that's probably a dirty word. You have to call it an L-turn or something like that. Anyway, that's how they'll have to sit. But it is a very strange result, and there'll be a lot of questions asked about this particular performance of the alliance in view of the tiny number of seats. It's an old story, we know it, but it's more vividly displayed in this election yesterday, with which we're getting the results than we've seen. Now, the result from Richmond and Barnes, where there's been a recount.
First time I've been accused of that.
Just asking the returning officer to speak up a
Parliamentary
bit.
election, Richmond and Barnes constituency, the 9th of June 1983. The counting of the votes has now been completed, and I hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Hanley, Jeremy James, 20,695. Vaz, Nigel Keith Anthony Standish,
Labour.
3,156. Watson, Alan John,
Liberal.
20,621. And that Jeremy James Hanley has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
That's one of the closest results we've had tonight. The Liberals just failing to take Richmond and Barnes. Alan Watson on his third attempt. Jeremy Handley, new candidate coming into the constituency in place of Sir Anthony Royal, just holds on, 74 votes. Very disheartening for the Liberals who thought they had Richmond and Barnes this time. Now, Peter.
David, the Tories are just 4 short of the winning post. Here is the state of the parties at the moment after 521 results. Look at the Conservatives there on 322, Labour on 182. There are the changes on the old Parliament, as we think it would have been in the new boundaries. And there is the winning post, and look, the Tories are just nudging up to it there. 4 more seats, and they'll be through with an overall majority. Labour on 182. The forecast that we have is still the Tories way through with about 146 majority. There is the share, and notice how the Labour Party are now pushing the Liberal Alliance back about 3% into third place. Labour Party going for their worst share of the vote, though, since 1918, 29%, and the Tories there at 43%, actually slightly down on what they were in the last election. Here are the gains now all over the country, 59 of them, most of them Tory. And notice we just had that gain that we didn't notice earlier on in Gordon up in the northeast of Scotland. You see that orange pip right up there in the northeast tip, just by Banff up there in the northeast tip of Scotland. That's a Liberal SDP gain up there, and a few more Liberal SDP gains, 6 of them altogether. They've made 6 altogether, including Yeovil, Montgomery, Liverpool, Mossley Hill, Leeds West and Colne Valley. And the position that we expect to see in the new Parliament, there is the building bricks forming up, the new Parliament at the top there. We drop down the 2 main parties to the bottom of the screen. You can see the Tories are forecast to go way through the winning post with a Conservative majority now of 138, 394 Conservatives, and even if you drop all the rest of those opposition parties down there popping up to join Labour, Labour can only muster, or the opposition altogether can muster 256 seats altogether, a very clear Tory majority of 138.
So we're just... Peter, where have we got to actually on seats? Have we reached 326 now?
We've got 324.
Oh,
2 to go. 2 to go before the Tories are through.
Good. Well, at that point, Tam Dalyell holding on to Lynn Lithgow. Let's go to Robin Day. We'll be back again in a moment with more results.
Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Ducan, representing the Tory party, as we get to the final victory, the actual victory in this campaign, what do you think about what David Dimbleby was saying in his little piece a few moments ago? This is no vindication of Mrs. Thatcher, and it's a rather strange result.
I think, if David doesn't mind my saying so, it was absolute nonsense. Here we have a most tremendous victory, probably the biggest victory since 1945, and how anybody can say it isn't a vindication of the Prime Minister and the government's policies, I can't think. We've got 3 million people out of work, and still the unemployed, the young people, are voting strongly for the Conservatives. It's a tremendous vindication and a great victory.
And what do you say to that, Alan Beef?
Well, exactly the same proportion of people are voting for the Conservatives as did so in 1979. And our wonderful electoral system manages to transfer the same votes, the same proportion of votes, into a large victory. But the difference is that a quarter of the people are voting for the alliance.
Yeah, but you see, one can see the case for electoral reform and proportional representation, but the fact is, at the moment, we work under a parliamentary system which produces this kind of result. By that token, Mrs Thatcher's got her mandate and her vote of confidence, hasn't she?
No, there's no vote of confidence. The same number of people are voting for her as before. I concede that we're working under this system, and I'm impressed by the gains that are gradually being notched up by Liberals under that system. Gains like Leeds West, Yeovil, Montgomery, Gordon in Scotland. We are making those kind of gains which you make by very, very hard groundwork under this system.
Now,
but the balance of opinion is quite different.
Let's see how this result is going to affect the Conservative cabinet and the Conservative majority in Parliament. Would you not say that, given a huge majority like this in Parliament, this is going to increase the possibility of some perhaps critical groups in the Tories going up?
I shouldn't have thought that,
Usually
Robin.
it does, doesn't it?
Yes, it can happen. We've got to see, of course, how effective the opposition is. And on the figures we've got at the moment, the Liberals and the SDP are trivial. Absolutely trivial. I can't think why we elevate them to such an important show.
A quarter of the people voted for them, that's
well,
right.
13 seats. The Conservatives have got more than 300 more than that. But in any case, what's the future going to be like? Are these people going to be an effective opposition or not? That's a very good question. If they're not, then I tell you, we in the Conservative Party on the back benches will provide a constructive, continuous criticism of what is happening. We're bound to do
the
that.
flag of rebellion already, Mr. Newcombe?
No, I'm not doing
After
anything of the sort.
your interesting report during the election?
I'm not doing anything of the sort. What I'm saying is this, and I thought Jim Callaghan had a wise word to say about it. The job of all of us in the House of Commons is to speak the truth as we see it. And all of us will do that, I've no doubt. And I've no doubt, too, Prime Minister will rely upon her backbenchers to help her carry through some very radical programmes.
And what about the Cabinet? Would you see a new Cabinet now?
Well, that's for the Prime Minister to say.
I know. But you're a very intelligent chap and you know a great deal about these things. Share your thoughts.
Well, Sir Robin, it's very nice of you to talk to me in that very flattering way. I would hope all the time we will bring forward the young men in the Conservative Party, of whom we have a large number, some very, very able young men, and we will see that they get an opportunity to have experience of government early in life, yes.
Yes, that wasn't what I had in mind, actually. What I meant was any of the present Cabinet to be sacked, do you think?
Sacked is the wrong word, but I would hope all the time, every 2 years or so, the Cabinet would have a fresh look. But that's, of course, for the Prime Minister to decide.
The Conservatives now have an overall majority in this Parliament.
That's right.
They've now got it. When we started talking, they didn't have it. But
Yes,
in the last
but
minute, they've got it. What do you want to say?
I think it's splendid. And I think it's a great triumph for the Prime Minister. And it's a great triumph for sanity.
She's probably watching now. What do you say to her?
Well, I would like to tell her that I think the adventure on which she began, the crusade to bring realism to the affairs of this country, is something her party has always understood. And I'm glad now the country understands it and has demonstrated its confidence in her.
What is your comment on Mrs Thatcher's overall majority?
It's a freak of the electoral system, and I hope that under amongst the many Conservatives who've been produced by this freak, there are at least some who don't want to see the dismantling of some of our essential services like health and education, and who will make common cause with those of us who from other parties in Parliament will try to ensure that a sensible course is followed.
Thank you, Alan Beef. David?
So 3-2-6 is passed. The Conservatives have their majority. They will form the next government. Well, we've known that since 10 o'clock this evening. Some people would say we'd known it for a long time before that with all the polls that we've had. But there it is in reality at 20 minutes to 3. The Conservatives on 3-2-6, giving them a majority over all other parties in the House of Commons. It's now a question of how much further that goes. We're predicting it's going to go to 394. Now we go down to Carmarthen in Wales, where there's a Plaid Cymru challenge. Join our reporter there, Peter Walker, who has some news from us. There are a lot of people milling around in the street outside the count.
These are the scenes at Knott Square in Carmarthen, where an hour ago the police received an anonymous call saying that there was an incendiary device planted in the ladies' toilet a matter of 15 feet away from where the 100 counters were tolling the poll, rather, here in the Carmarthen City Hall. The police have asked the people to move away, but unfortunately inside the hall they've cleared almost completely now. Outside they're still standing around the people, but they're trying to get the count restarted in the nearby Civic Hall. But at the moment everybody is trying to clear the place. The police have asked everyone to get away, and the bomb disposal squad from Hereford left a matter of 45 minutes ago. Unfortunately they won't be here for about another hour and 20 minutes, so at the moment everything is in a state of some confusion, but they're trying to get the count started again here at Carmarthen, in the County City Hall rather, which is a matter of 100 yards away from here. Back now.
David Steele up there at his constituency in Tweed Electric and Lauderdale, just waiting for his result to come in. I don't know when we'll get that, but it should be fairly soon. His is another constituency that's been changed around, but he should be fairly safe up there. And we'll be going up there in just a moment to get it. Let's just have a look at one or two other results that have come through. This one, Tam Dalyell, memorable for his attacks, or the most recently memorable for his attacks on the Falklands campaign. His majority for Labour goes down by a bit, and the SDP does very well in that seat, but Tam Dalyell is safely back for Linlithgow. And then the Conservatives hold on to Clwyd North West. This one's interesting because Sir Anthony Mair, who was also incidentally against the Falklands War, had to fight in the High Court to actually get represented as the Conservative Party's candidate at this election against Beata Brooks. You remember there was a great row towards the end, one of the few occasions when the Tories went to court. Everybody thinks it's only the Labour Party that does, but he did it, and he's now won the seat with a majority, and his share of the vote is up. Vindication for his decision to stand there. Now we go across to Finchley for Mrs. Thatcher's result ahead.
And a declaration for the Prime Minister's seat rather later than we'd been led to expect. There have been delays in this result caused by the sheer number of candidates, 11 of them in all, 8 of whom might be called fringe candidates. They are now in the council chamber where the result is to be declared in a few moments. We're just awaiting Mrs. Thatcher's arrival. She will be brought in through a corridor and to take her position next to the Mayor on the dais. While we're waiting, just a few words about Finchley. It's a North London suburb, a densely populated residential area. It has always been Conservative, except for a brief period in the 1920s, just for 1 year when it was in Liberal hands. There's been a fair crowd outside Hendon Town Hall all evening, a certain amount of excitement building up, colourful scenes. The Monster candidate, David Such, was out among the crowd earlier, handing out his raving loony stickers to members of the police force, and a very good-humoured evening. The fringe candidates are now taking their positions inside, a considerable crush with a very heavy press corps here. His prediction, incidentally, David Such's prediction when he arrived outside the town hall earlier, his comment, a landslide for the raving loonies. Well, that, of course, was a reference to his own party, which has candidates standing in several seats. Other fringe candidates in Mrs. Thatcher's constituency, there is a rail, not motorway candidate, a ban every licensing law, an anti-censorship, a law and order in Gotham City candidate, Belgrano blood hunger. Of course, the man who tried to stand with the name of Margaret Thatcher, a name which he took by a deed poll, he was debarred to avoid confusion in the poll. We're still waiting for Mrs. Thatcher. She's spent the time since she arrived here in an office following the results closely. We've had no word, no indication of her reaction to the picture as it has unfolded. But she's been with her aides and associates in a room not very far away, but there's been no sign of her. She's been MP for Finchley since 1959, when she entered Parliament. Her vote in 1979 was nearly 21,000, 20,918. She had an almost 8,000 vote majority then over the Labour candidate, and Finchley is a constituency which has not been affected by the recent boundary changes. So an 8,000 vote majority is the one that the Prime Minister is defending. She has never been able to count on a massive majority in this constituency. The electorate this time, 56,176. But we do have news of the poll. The turnout, in fact, is rather down on the turnout at the last election. The turnout this time, 70.3%. That is down 2% on the last election. Well, the council chamber filling up rapidly. And we expect Mrs. Thatcher to make her appearance any second now. As I was saying earlier, the man, in fact, who is declaring the result here, the Mayor, John Tiplady, was a member of the Conservative Constituency Selection Committee, which back in May of 1958 selected one Margaret Thatcher to be the candidate for Finchley. So the man declaring her result tonight had a part in setting Margaret Thatcher off on her political career. And he was telling me earlier that she was clearly the outstanding candidate among the 20 who were interviewed. And he has since then followed the Prime Minister's career with more than usual interest. We're just now seeing the entrance by which Mrs. Thatcher will appear, and the Prime Minister is now just proceeding through the ante-room with her advisors. There'll be a delay of just a few seconds before she enters the council chamber here. Just entering a corridor which leads into the council chamber.
We're all waiting to see the person who is going to be the next Prime Minister, or will continue to be the Prime Minister of this country.
A very packed assembly. We seem to have lost Mrs. Thatcher momentarily in the recess of the corridor. Escorted, of course, by her regular special branch detectives. And here she comes. No, it's not the Prime Minister. Some of the other candidates, Mrs. Thatcher among them. Mrs. Thatcher takes her seat.
Parliamentary election, 9th of June 1983, constituency of Finchley. The percentage of electors voting at the election for the constituency of Finchley was 70.37%. I, John Charlie Tiplady, returning officer for the constituency of Finchley, hereby declare that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Mary Helen Anscombe, Rail, not Motorway, Independent, 42. Margaret Jane Joachim, Liberal SDP Alliance, 7,763.
A gain of only 2,500 over the Liberal vote in the last election.
Joseph Newen, Ban Every Licensing Law Society candidate, 75. Lawrence Gregory Spiegel, Labour Party candidate, 10,302.
That figure is down by nearly 3,000 from the last election.
Lord David Edward Such, official monster raving loony party, 235.
David Such's great ambition to save his deposit. And now Mrs. Thatcher.
Margaret Hilda Thatcher, Conservative Party candidate, 19,616.
Well, Mrs. Thatcher's vote is down by 1,300 approximately. Down by 1,300.
Brian Clifford Wareham, Party of Associates with Licensees, 27. David Alec Webb, Anti-Censorship Reform of Obscene Publications Act, 28. Benjamin Collingham Wedmore, Bolano Blood Hunger, 13. Anthony Peter Whitehead, Law and Order in Gotham City, 37. Simone Joan Wilkinson, Women, Life on Earth Ecology Party, 279.
Mrs. Thatcher's percentage of the vote this time, 50.9.
Hilda Thatcher has been duly elected to serve as a Member of Parliament for the said constituency.
Mrs. Thatcher's majority is down very slightly by minus 1.6%. That is our very quick calculation. Last time she had a 52.5% of the vote. This time, just 50.9. But a majority of 9,000.
To move the vote of thanks, and also ask Lawrence Spiegel and Mrs. Joachim to support the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Mr. Returning Officer, on behalf of my fellow candidates, may I thank you and all your officials and the police for the very long hours which they put in during this election campaign and for the excellent way in which they have carried out their duties. May I also especially thank my own chairman, agent and supporters.
One of the candidates then tried to pass in front of Mrs. Thatcher. He's been restrained by police.
Particularly heavy burden placed upon them this time, and I am very, very grateful to them.
The anti-censorship candidate trying to shout the Prime Minister down.
Whatever it may be one's fortunes nationally, one's strength and inspiration comes from the support which one receives in one's local constituency. And may I say how very grateful I am to everyone in Finchley for that support, and how very proud and honoured I am to represent Finchley and Frown Barnet once again. Mr. Returning Officer, may I add just two more things. First, it has been a rather exciting evening for some of us, and I have reason to think that we may have been returned to serve nationally for another period in government. May I say that I approach that term of office with a very great sense of responsibility and humility. It has been a historic election, and I'm very proud of the honour conferred on me. And finally, I just want to say thank you to my husband, Dennis, who has been absolutely marvellous throughout.
Mrs. Thatcher being very cautious. An exciting evening for some of us, she said. She approaches the next years with a great sense of responsibility and humility. Now, I hand you back to the election studio as Mrs. Thatcher acknowledges the applause.
Yes, as returning officer for the Tweedale, Ettrick and Lauderdale parliamentary constituency, I hereby declare that the total number of votes given for each candidate in this election was as follows. Alistair Ballantyne, Conservative Party, 8,329. William John Allen McCartney, Scottish National Party, 1,455. Michael Arthur John Saron, Labour Party, 2,200. David Martin Scott Steele, Liberal Alliance, 16,868. And I hereby declare that David Martin Scott Steele has been duly elected to serve as Member of Parliament for this constituency.
David Steele will be well pleased with that majority.
So, David Steele's majority up. We'll see those figures in just a moment. Mrs. Thatcher being extremely cautious, considering that she now has a clear 339 seats. She's got enough, over 326, to form the next government, saying she'll approach that task with responsibility and with humility. and thanking her husband, Dennis, for his help during the campaign. Might be just a moment to note who actually has gone down so far. Brian McGee, John Roper, Joan Lester, Ossia Bryan, Mike Thomas, Tom McNally, Shirley Williams, Edward Lyons, John Horam, Christopher Brocklebank Fowler, Bill Rogers, Geoffrey Thomas, Neville Sanderson, Jim Wellbeloved, Bill Pitt, Eric Ogden, Tony Benn, Tom Bradley, David Ginsburg, Dixon Mabon, Shirley Summerskill, Philip Whitehead, Ron Brown. Whatever motives it is that takes people into politics, you can't help but admit that they have courage to put their careers on the line like this every election. And those ones out of a job, unless they can find somewhere else to go. Now, here are David Steele's figures. Let's just have a look at those. A majority of 8,500, Tweedale, Ettrick and Lauderdale. And that majority is up. Conservatives second, SNP coming way at the bottom of the poll. So he seems to have got himself a good, safe constituency now. He's built that up over a number of years. It's a new bit, but he seems to be safe there now. Now, Peter.
David, here's a measure of Mrs. Thatcher's victory. After 535 results, the popular vote shows her now touching 11 million votes, with Labour way behind, 7 1/3 million roughly, and the Liberal STP alliance chasing Labour with 6.5 million just about, and the others on 500,000. And here are the gains all over the country for the Tories. 45 gains so far, 45 seats changing hands there, from Labour 36, from the Liberal STP alliance 9. And the Tories even gaining some seats from the STP deserters, splitting the Labour STP vote on the left and winning seats. And here are the Tory gains from Labour. The Wrekin we just had, and Derbyshire South, a terrific majority there, 8,500 odd, winning that seat from Labour. Here they go all the way down the country, 45 of them altogether. Bridgend in South Wales, as Halifax, Shirley Summerskill going down. Sherwood, that new, rather romantically named seat in Nottinghamshire, Sherwood Forest. Cannock and Burntwood, that was really quite a safe Labour seat, still gone down by 2,000 votes there to the Tories. There's Birmingham Northfield, which the Labour Party won in that recent by-election. Stevenage has gone down, Amber Valley has gone down. Darlington, Slough, Joan Lester and Nuneaton. David.
And we go straight over to Finchley.
Be claiming a very clear victory.
It is a clear victory, but perhaps the best place to claim it is not within one's own count, although one must mention it. I gained tremendous strength from being a member for this constituency. I enjoy it tremendously, but I'm very sensible of the honour that's been conferred upon the Conservative Party at what is really a historic election. To win again is a very great thing, and I mean very strongly that one does commence that second term of office with a sense of great responsibility and humility.
Some have expressed concern about the effects of a landslide victory, Mrs. Thatcher.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
I've been very interested in watching the results and how varied they have been, and for some people very disappointed.
Well, Mrs. Finchley, I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Thatcher of Finchley, giving her first comments to Nicholas Witchell as she comes out of her count, having successfully held that seat in Finchley. It was a majority just about what it was last time round. And now at this stage we've had 543 results in. I don't know how many more there will be tonight. I don't suspect all that many more, but there'll be certain perhaps one or two still to come. Let's go over to Robin Day.
And I think I have with me in another part of the country Mr. Roy Hattersley. Is that correct?
Correct, as far as I'm concerned, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. With me here is Norman Tebbit and Alan Beath. Mr. Hattersley, we haven't heard from a spokesman of your party since the Conservatives broke through the majority line in the new House of Commons. What do you have to say?
Well, not entirely unexpected, but I think the Labour defeat, for that's what we now witness, is very much smaller than very many people prophesied 4 or 5 days ago. I think we picked up in the campaign for the last 5 days, began to get the real issues through, and the Labour Party is clearly alive and well. It's a large and effective opposition, and we begin to prepare ourselves for the 1988 election and winning that one.
Do you think that this result proves the case, as several people have been saying this evening, for what is called electoral reform?
No, of course I don't. Electoral reform, and you're right to say what it's called, you're right to put the inverted commas around it, has two great disadvantages, depending on which system one chooses. If you're to have a system which is based on individual constituencies, then it turns into the election of the second best. it becomes the election of the man who nobody really dislikes, but nobody actually wants. And I don't want to see the lowest common denominator elected. If, on the other hand, you have some regional system, some list system, you divorce the Member of Parliament from his or her constituency.
But,
and I think that would be a profoundly bad thing.
Let me just put this one point too, though. Do you think that the result, so far as the alliance is concerned, is fair with, say, about 25% of the popular vote, and they'll have, what, a handful of seats in the House of Commons? Is that fair?
It's wholly fair, because the system which has worked very well in British democracy is the constituency member system and the necessity to come top of the poll in the constituency.
Norman
It's not terribly attractive to say the old rules don't apply to us in an advantageous situation, therefore we want to change them.
Norman Tebbit, what do you say? You agree with Mr. Hattersley there, do you?
Yes, I do, and if you look at a seat like Bermondsey, for example, the Liberals have held that, and they've held it because they got more votes than anyone else. It's terribly straightforward. If you get more votes than any of the other candidates, you win. The Liberal Party's problem, which is becoming shared now by the Labour Party, it seems, is that they can't actually achieve that.
What do you say to that, Alan Beith?
The problem is that the support of the party, instead of being concentrated in areas dominated by any particular class, is spread evenly across the country. A quarter of the people of the United Kingdom, spread right across the country, support the alliance. That very, very strong body of opinion, which has been reflected in all the votes so far, is not properly represented in the system.
Well, now, we've discussed this quite a lot this evening. Let me come to Mr. Hattersley on another matter. What's going to happen in the Labour Party now, Mr. Hattersley?
Nothing as spectacular as you would like to see. I think the Labour Party is going to moderately and sensibly and gradually reassert itself as the representative of a very large body of British opinion. It's going to speak for the people who traditionally are its origins, who are traditionally the people it supports. And I think the Labour Party is going to pull itself together into a situation whereby we can win the next general election.
How are you going
to find a gradual evolution of the Labour
How are
Party.
you going to avoid what happened after the last election when you said exactly the same thing?
No, I don't think I did.
Well, not you personally, but the Labour Party said we're going to pull ourselves together.
No, I think that's quite wrong, Sir Robin, if I may say so. I think there were some people in the Labour Party after the last election who said there must be radical changes, a new direction, a alteration of the leadership, a difference in style, a fundamental change in the way the Labour Party's behaved. I think we're now in for a period of consolidation, a period when the various forces within the Labour Party who've always been there choose to work together and struggle to work together. I think this is a time of coming together within the Labour Party. After the last election, I fear and regret it was a time of falling apart.
How do you see that comment, Mr. Tebbit?
Well, I think it relates a bit to the previous comment. You see, this country, the system has about it something which is very simple. We require a government in office and an alternative government in waiting. Now, we've clearly got a right-of-centre government in office. That's fine. The Conservative Party provides that. What we don't seem to have at the moment is a left-of-centre potential government awaiting. People don't actually support the alliance strongly. They support it because it's the best of a poor bunch. They certainly don't want to support the Labour Party because they think it's gone far too far to the left.
Hold on a moment, Mr. Tebbit.
So
I'm told there's something important happening.